Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Technique Tuesday. My name is Ali Board and I am streaming live on YouTube. But of course, you might be watching me another way. You might be watching me on catch up via YouTube. You might also be watching me via my blog. I will take you through all of those things in just a moment. It's really lovely to have you all here. It's really fantastic to see all of you in the chat and talking to each other too. So that's wonderful. Now, what's Technique Tuesday all about? Technique Tuesday is something that I started in lockdown, just before lockdown, and it was a way of bringing my artistic community together, and it's kind of grown and was on Facebook and behind closed doors a little bit, and now it is free for everybody to watch, and it's really marvellous to have you here with me. Now, like I said, you might be watching on a variety of platforms, and I just want to take you through those if that's okay, because I know that we've got some new people in the room today. So good morning if you're watching live, and a very special good morning to obviously our beautiful Australian friends, because this one is particularly pertinent to you. Now, if you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe to my channel. I know it doesn't seem like a big deal, but it is really important to make sure that I am seen. It's the same with social media. Make sure that you like the artists that you follow. Make sure that you see what it is that they have to say, because to be honest, that is as good a support as you can ever give us. Now, there's plenty of opportunity to leave me a comment as well. If you are watching me live today, Tuesday the 4th of July, and also I want to say happy 4th of July to our American friends too. If you are watching on YouTube, you can take part in the chat. Lots of people kind of not only talking to me, but also talking to each other, which is awesome. Do leave me a comment. If you're watching this on catch up, then leave me a comment on YouTube too. Or if you're watching via the blog, then you can always leave a comment. Plenty of places to chat to me. Or if you have a question about something, I will always do my very best to get back to you. Now, talking about the blog, let us take you to the place where you need to go to see that. I'm doing all of this because I've got so many things open. So I'm just going to have a click around, and let's take you to that website so that you can see exactly where you need to go. This is the address that you're going to need, www.learningtopaint.co.uk. And I know some of you watching right now are seasoned veterans and going, Ali, we know all about this. But we've got new people in the room today, and I'm very keen that they know where to go to find all of the resources. And then when you go to Learning to Paint, the website will look something like this. And yours might look a little bit different if you're looking at it on a phone or a tablet, because that menu that's along the top, you might not be able to see. You might see it as 3 little lines, which you need to click on. And you can see there at the top, it says blog. So let's go over to that blog now, and we'll see where you can find all the information today. There it is. Look, Technique Tuesday for July, and it has already gone live. I'm going to click on that little button that says read more. And there you have everything that you could possibly need for today's little paint along. So Technique Tuesday for July, there's introduction, and there's our theme of the month. I try to have a different theme every single month that I link the majority of my classes and workshops to. And today is all about, this month I should say, is all about a trip to the zoo. I took a trip to Longleat, which is very close to where I live, saw some amazing animals, and that is where the inspiration for all of the things that I'm doing this month has come from. Here is the photograph. Beautiful sleeping koala. How cute is that? Very fluffy, just in the kind of nook of a eucalyptus tree. And there you will see you'll be able to download that photograph as well. So you can download it, print it out, so that you can follow it along with any tuition that I give today. And here is all the equipment. Now, you might not necessarily see all of the equipment in my demonstration. What I try to do is include every last little bit so that you know what my drawing board is, the trace down that I might have used to do a transfer technique, what ball pen is my favourite, my putty eraser, all of that kind of stuff. And then at the bottom, you might be watching it right now, but of course, because I am recording this live, that is where you'll find the broadcast. And as long as you can find my blog, you can go back and discover all of those. Let me just give you a little bit of an insight into the amount of information that is on this blog. Last month I did a tips and techniques where I was talking about sketching pens. Last month's Technique Tuesday was all about step stairs and archways, so you can go back and you can do that. And there's lots of older posts as well. This blog is really it just gives you a wealth of information for all sorts of things that you might want to help you out with your painting adventures. So that's there for you to dig in and out of as long as you want. There it is, learningtopaint.co.uk. And talking about learning to paint, I have news just in case you have missed my my socials recently. I'm going to be at Patchings next week. Patchings, that huge great art festival just north of Nottingham, and I'm on my own this year. I'm branching out on my own, but just in case you have your program already and you're thinking, well, I know Ali is there, why can't I see her name? That is because I am under the Learning to Paint banner. So I'm right at the end, right at the bottom of the marquees, and you're not going to miss me at all because, funnily enough, everything in my life is going to be purple. Now, if you do fancy joining me for that festival, it is on the 13th, 14th and 15th of July 2023, just in case you're watching this on catch up. And if you'd like to buy an advance ticket, you need to go to patchingsartcentre.co.uk to buy your ticket. And then you can get in. There's loads of stuff to see. I mean, just masses and masses of stuff. But do come and find me on my stand. Come and give me a massive hug. It'll be great to see you. I'm also going to apologise for my voice a little bit today because, as I'm sure you know, I've just been recovering from being a bit poorly. So for my voice, I've got sweets and drinks and things galore, so hopefully it won't come to that. Let us, without any further ado, go to that overhead camera, shall we? And we'll see what it is that I have planned for you today. So this is the very start. I'm just going to pop another light on so that you can see that a little more easily. Dearie me. Here is the start of my project. This is the paper that I am going to be using today. It is Hahnemuhl's Andalusia paper, quite an unusual paper. It's in a block form, so it's glued all the way round. And it's 500 grams. It's incredibly heavy, which is great because it means that I can throw all sorts at it today and it's not going to give out on me. And the interesting thing about this paper is you probably see at the bottom it says rough/cold pressed. Now, if you know anything about watercolour paper, you'll know that those are two different surfaces. So how does this paper deal with actually having two different surfaces? Well, that's because it is slightly rougher on the front and more cold pressed on the reverse. So let's open it up and you can see my sketch right there. The surface that I'm going to be painting on today is a slightly rougher version. But when I take the sheet away from my block and I flip it over, because it's 500 grams, I can do that as well. I can paint on the back of it, just in case my koala doesn't turn out quite how I would like it to be. You never know. I can then paint on the back, and that's more of a cold pressed surface. So it's a really interesting paper, a very unusual one. And you will find links to all of the equipment that I use over there on that blog post. Just to let you know, they are what's known as affiliate links. And what that means is you do me a really big favour if you click on those links and purchase anything through them, because it means I get a tiny kickback. And what that does is help me to keep Technique Tuesday free for everybody, so that you don't need to pay to be able to access this tuition. That's why things like liking and subscribing and stuff like that is so important. Lots of you in the live chat wishing me well. Thank you very much. I am very much on the mend, but just now and again, when I have to chatter a lot, sometimes my cough gets the better of me, but we'll see how we get on. So let's start our painting, shall we? Now, this is the reference. You saw it on the blog there. so that you can download it yourself. This is the piece of reference that I'm using. I've adapted it ever so slightly because it's me, and you know I don't like to work too religiously from photographs. It's quite an unusual view of this koala because it took me a while to work out what was back leg and what was front leg. And obviously the poor little thing is fast asleep. They do sleep for a huge amount of their day after eating eucalyptus, I gather. I was very, very privileged when I went to Longleat, not only to see their collection of koalas, but also one had just given birth as well to a baby. And I really don't think you get a lot cuter than a little miniature koala in its mother's arms. It was so sweet. And I know that one shouldn't anthropomorphize things, but goodness me, it was the fluffiest thing I'd ever seen. So that is the photograph that I have used. And yes, a couple of you saying what a lovely photograph it is. It's a gorgeous photo, isn't it? Not mine, I'm sad to say. I did take some photos, but at the time I only had my phone on me. I didn't have my professional camera. So I've actually used this photograph from a royalty-free site. Let's go back to overhead. So I've sketched it out, and like I said, I have adapted it a little bit. I've made it more about the koala and less about the tree. When I put the tree in, I'm not going to make too much of it. And I've put some leaves, some sort of judiciously placed leaves at the bottom, because I wasn't really sure from the photograph where koala bottom stopped and tree started. So I'm actually going to cover those with a little bit of foliage. But I've got a couple of things up my sleeve that I want to do before I necessarily start painting. And this is the first of them. If you've followed my tuition a lot, you will know of my love of using a little bit of ink work before I start to throw watercolour at it. And these pens, the Unipin pens, made by the Mitsubishi Pen Company, are just brilliant. They are very waterproof, but the thing that I love about them more than anything else is this particular version, which is the dark grey version. And I've talked in previous demonstrations about how most of the time when you buy a waterproof sketching pen, it is usually either black or brown. And that isn't always applicable. Black is a very useful colour, so is brown. But if your subject matter happens to be something that doesn't need to be that either a bolder colour or that warmer colour, and obviously particularly a koala, then the grey is going to be much, much better. And the lovely Julie has just popped up into the chat, who I know is over there in Australia and is one of our lovely Australian friends. She says the eucalyptus makes them sleepy. So yes, I had forgotten that fact, and I'm relying on you, Julie, and any more of our Australian friends who are out there to be able to give me lots of koala facts for that. So I'm going to start off with the grey pen. This is a 0.5 in the grey, and I'm going to use it. Let me just find the photograph for myself. I'm going to use it to make sure that my pencil lines don't disappear when I start to throw colour at it. So I'm using a very specific mark making technique, and that is to be able to describe all the different parts of my picture using different marks on the paper. So for example, the top of our koala head is relatively smooth line. It's still fluffy, but it's quite a smooth contour, as opposed to the ears, which have really kind of fluffy ends. And so what I'm trying to do is to get my pen to simulate that mark making. Where I want there to be more detail, or where I need to be more careful with the application, I will slow down the way that I apply the pen so that I can get a smoother line out of it. Now, because we have a sleepy koala, our koala has its eyes shut. I don't necessarily want to do that in a continuous line because I'm afraid that that will be too harsh. Excuse me. So I've popped in a little dot dash style of line, and then I'm going to do the nose. Now the noses look really hard on a koala, but they're not. And they are, however, quite an unusual shape. So I want to make sure that I get those nostrils in, and particularly the surroundings. But of course, that fur encroaches on the edge of the nose, so I don't necessarily want there to be a very, very smooth line there. Now moving on to those front legs. Now you can't see, but I have the photograph up in front of me on my computer and I'm looking at it all the time. I'm looking at what I need to make a nice kind of fuzzy line, and I'm looking at what I might need to have as a smoother contour. And you will notice in the way that I draw that I stop-start an awful lot. So I will pause, have a really good look at my photograph, and then I will make another mark. And you will also notice that I use what I call a Morse code technique. So it's lots of dots and dashes so that I can change my mind about potentially where I place any of my paint, where my brush goes. If you have a very solid line and your brush goes over the top of that line, it looks like a bit of a mistake. If you have a broken line, then you have much more flexibility to be able to paint over and around things, and then it looks very, very deliberate rather than necessarily a mistake. I know it's not a mistake, but sometimes we look back at our paintings, don't we, and we think to ourselves, what was I doing? What was I thinking about doing that there? So I'm putting in the bark of the eucalyptus. It would be really tempting to go to town on the bark of this eucalyptus, but this is not my focal point. I don't want my viewer to be looking either side of my koala. I want the koala to be the absolute star of the show. Now, down to these leaves, which again, I don't want to over describe. I'm not entirely convinced that these leaves in the photograph are necessarily eucalyptus leaves. They might just be old ones. So rather than trying to describe the species, I'm going to put in some really nice kind of loose marks. And then that way I don't have to paint them in too carefully either. I'm a very fast painter. I like to get my shapes down in a very loose and impressionistic manner. So I've discovered that if I draw things in exquisite amounts of detail, then I have to paint things in exquisite amounts of detail. And I really don't want to do that. I want to save all of my detail for the important parts where we're looking at the koala's face and maybe a little bit of texture. Now, as daft as it sounds, I'm actually going to dry that. I know this pen is waterproof, but it's only waterproof when it is completely dry. So I try to get into the habit of drying my pen, no matter what sort of pen it is, in between applications. That way I know that it's dry. And because of my dodgy voice today, it just gives me 30 seconds or so just to give my voice a rest. So don't disappear on me, bear with me. I'm going to give this a bit of a blast of heat. There we go, that should be enough just to make sure that that pen has really kind of set. If you're watching me live on YouTube and you have any observations about pens that you've used, or if you've used the grey uni pen and you get on with it really well, do share your knowledge. That's part of what we do as Technique Tuesday, is sharing what we know in the community, because you never know what you might say might really, really help somebody out there. And if you are watching this on catch up, that live chat is still there to be able to view so that you can see it along at the same time. So I've finished with the waterproof pen now, and I'm going to move on to a different kind of pen, and that is a water-soluble style of pen. So this is, you can use any kind of water-soluble pen. You can use a children's colouring pen. What you want to look out for is the bit that says that it is washable, because if it is washable, what that means is that it's going to be able to run when you take either a spray bottle or a damp brush. These are made for this technique. This is the Stabilo pen company, and the Stabilo do two different thicknesses. They do this one, which is called a 0.68, and they do a finer one, which is called a 0.88. I'm using the thicker one today because they do a slightly bigger range of colours in the broader one, and there's a couple of greys here. So what I'm going to be doing is applying some of this pen and spraying it with a spray bottle to start to think about the texture of our koala and start to think about the shadows too. So let's start with the pale one. Oh, excuse me. Just in case you're just joining us, I do apologise for my voice. I've had a bit of a nasty cough recently. And I thought I was going to be okay this morning, but of course coughs creep up on you, don't they? Now, let's add some grey. Let's have a look at that photograph again. Let's take you over to that bit of reference material. We want some lovely bits of texture on the fur of our koala, don't we? We can work on the darks and other things later. What we want is a little bit of grey just to kind of set the scene. So I'm going to start with the paler one. This is number 94. They don't go by colour name, which is a little bit frustrating. And I'm going to use this one to describe some of the paler areas of my koala. And I'm going to use, as you can see, that lovely kind of scribbly technique so that I can start to work on the texture of that fur. Now, a couple of you saying that you also love to use Stabilo pens. They are great, aren't they? Particularly good for animals, that kind of thing. They're also great for taking out on location. If you like to paint on location and you don't want to take a whole load of stuff with you, these pens are brilliant for that because you can wet them with a brush or wet them with a spray bottle like I'm going to, and they're kind of quick, easy, accessible to use. So that is the pale grey. Now we're going to move on to a darker grey. Now I've got two here. Are they the same? Yes, they are the same. So this is number 96. And as you can see, this one's a bit darker. So I'm going to be much more careful with this one. I don't necessarily want dark everywhere. I'm looking back at my photograph to understand where the shadows are. And I'm hoping that this is going to bring some of my koala to life even before I've got any paint on it at all. So we'll add a few shadows in there. I don't think I want to use this on the nose because I don't want it to particularly explode. But what we could do is use a tiny bit of dot and dash into the fur of our koala. Although I have got another trick up my sleeve later to be able to add a bit more texture. Let's go to that front leg. It's got a bit of a shadow in here. I'm using a really light touch on my paper. I'm not clamping down on it at all. As you can probably see, I'm trying to hold my pen far away from the nib. And I'm using my little finger as an anchor to make a nice light mark, a light touch. In one of my workshops, one of my online workshops recently, we talked about the importance of the pressure that needs to be applied on whatever it is we're making a mark with, because you don't want to apply the same pressure throughout, otherwise you will end up with very regular marks. So I think that's enough, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a brush and a bit of kitchen roll at the ready and a pot of water, but I'm primarily going to use my spray bottle. Just going to spritz it to one side to make sure that it's working okay, and then from fairly far away I'm going to get the water to rain down on this pen, and you will see that it starts to move. It's not moving an awful lot. Some of the colours move more than others. The darker one will move more than the paler one, but I want it to creep. I want it to create that texture. If there's any part of it that I think, oh, do you know what, you could move a bit further than you actually are, I can go in with my brush and again, using the lightest of touches, go back in and work up some of these shadow areas. But already, look what a fantastic texture I get from those pens. And I haven't even really started painting yet. I haven't particularly worried about what colour my koala is going to be or any of the rest of it. Now, ideally, you want to let that move and spread a little bit. If it's spreading too much, you can use the your heat source early on it to kind of encapsulate it. I need to use my heat source on this straight away because I need to be moving on to the next part. All I am going to do is to just mop up some of the wetter areas so that it doesn't take too long to dry. So again, just bear with me while I give this a bit of a blast with the heat gun. Let's turn it up a notch. And for the time being, that will do. If you're doing this, if you're following along with this tuition, pop a pause in and make sure you give yourself plenty of time for this to dry. I'm going to crack on with it because obviously we are doing this as a live broadcast. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my tin of watercolour paints. This is the system that I use for my watercolours. I don't like pans as they baked. I find them really frustrating trying to get enough colour from them. And I'm not a big fan of the consistency of paint when it comes out of a tube. So this is my preferred method. What I do is I squeeze this out into empty pans, into empty versions of this. I allow my colour to dry, and then I can just spritz it with a bit of water in a second and it will be good to go. So we need some colours for this project. Now for any greenery, I'm going to go for Green Apatite Genuine. That is a Daniel Smith colour, one of my favourite greens to be had. Let's just build a little bridge here so that I can start to pick out some of my colours. So Green Apatite Genuine is going to be one of them. I need a colour for that eucalyptus. Let's have a look at the reference again, just to remind ourselves of the colours that we're after. So I definitely need a kind of reddish brown for that. You could go for light red or something similar. I'm just going to try and fish this one out. This is Italian Venetian red. This is another Daniel Smith colour. I actually prefer it to light red because it is slightly more transparent than light red. Light red can sometimes be a bit too opaque. And then what else do I need? I potentially need a blue, as daft as it sounds, because our koala has that bit of a sort of bluey grey undertone. So I'm going to go for cobalt blue, and this is my paint. This is my collection of paints, so the Alison Seaboard collection of watercolours. This is my cobalt blue. And again, in my collection of watercolours, I'm going to go for black iron oxide. This is an incredible colour because it granulates like you wouldn't believe. Now, just in case you're not sure about what granulation is the effect that the pigment has on the paper. It physically separates from itself, and what you get is an incredible texture. And black iron oxide in my range does that really well. Now, I think that's all the colours I'm going to need for the time being, but I'm going to pop my palette to one side just in case I need something else. I might need a bit of a pink tone for some parts of the koala, but we'll kind of see. Now, first thing I need to do is I need to spritz these to make sure that they come back to life again. And I'm going to start with cobalt blue. Now, the brush that I'm going to use for this is a Da Vinci brush. It's called a Casaneo or Casaneo mop brush. So this is a synthetic brush. If you follow my tuition often, you will know that wherever possible, I try to use a sustainable or vegan or vegetarian products in my practice. It's something that's incredibly important to me. And this is a mop brush. Mop brushes are usually a squirrel hair, but this one is a synthetic version. This is a size 2. The sizes on the handle mean absolutely nothing because they're only relative to the range that they're in. So for example, this is a size 2 Casaneo. This is my other brushes that I love to use, which are the SAA's Imitation Sable brush. This is smaller, but it's called a size 6. So don't worry about what it says on the handle. Just pick the brush that you think is the most appropriate. Excuse me. Right, let's pick up a bit of that cobalt blue. I don't need an awful lot of it because they're quite strong colours. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give our koala a touch of blue backdrop. We'll probably put some green in there as well. Let me just find my picture again so I can see what I'm doing. Let's pop some of that cobalt blue onto our koala because, like I said, our koala is a bit of a bluey grey. We'll use some water to blend that out. It's on dry paper at the moment so that I get a nice strength of colour. We'll put some blue down into these possibly eucalyptus leaves as well. And you'll see from the way that I'm using my brush that I'm kind of more drawing with it than I am necessarily painting with it. I'm using it very far up the handle, and I'm trying to get my brush to kind of dance its way across the surface. That way, just in the same way that I was talking about with mark making with your pen, I get an interesting selection of marks made with my brush as well. And one of my favourite techniques is always a spatter. This is quite an early on spatter. It helps to keep me honest in terms of reminding myself that I want this to be impressionistic. I don't want to be overdoing it too much. And it gives a kind of interesting dynamic to my paintings to possibly suggest maybe a bit of movement, although obviously there's not a lot of movement going on here at the moment because our koala is fast asleep, but certainly it gives it some life. Now straight away I'm going to go in with the green Apatite Genuine. Why do I love this colour so much? I love this colour because it describes greenery in nature really well. No matter what sort of greenery you are trying to describe, it is a brilliant green. And I know some of you out there are going, yes, but Ali, I've been told that I need to mix all my greens. My answer is, what do you think? You probably know me well enough by now to know that I like to have something that is relatively instant on my paper. I don't like to mess around with it too much, and I like it to be a colour that is going to look natural. I think this green Apatite Genuine does the job brilliantly. So let's be a bit bolder. Just got to move my chair back a bit with that greenery that's in the foreground. And again, let's be a bit more demonstrative with our brush marks so that we really get the sense that our koala is up in the tree. Let's push this shape a bit further. You can use the edge of our brush to make some different shapes. Now some of my paper is still wet where the cobalt blue has gone down. Some of it is dry, so the other thing that I'm getting is a kind of variation in lost and found marks. So lost marks are those kind of soft edges, and found marks are the much more solid, harder edges. And what's Rosie saying? Rosie's saying, Ali, you could try eucalyptus oil for your cough. Yes, actually, the irony has not been lost on me, Rosie. I could do with borrowing some of this from this koala, couldn't I? Now let's put some stems and stalks in. I'm using my brush right at the end of the handle now and using it very vertically, kind of borrowing a few techniques from Chinese painting really, to get some of those stalks and stems in. Do I want to do a lot more than that? Probably not, because I'm in grave danger of shifting the focus from the koala to the leaves. Let's just, I don't know why I folded my kitchen roll up before I started. Let's scrunch that up and let's lift a little bit of colour out. And then the last thing we're going to do before we give this a really good dry is we're going to give the bark of our koala a bit of a wash to kind of say, do you know what, there is a tree here. So we're going to paint around our koala negatively. Can go over the top of the pen. What that does is provide us with a decent shadow. And again, if you want it to look kind of impressionistic and you don't want to be making too many statements on your piece of paper, then don't make too strong a mark. That way you will get away with it. And let's drop some stronger colour just here and there to imply that there's some texture going on. Again, we're not doing a painting about what the texture of a eucalyptus is. Brain not working, get it in gear, Ali. We're doing a painting about a koala. Now, I'm going to turn my paper 180 degrees to do that trunk on the right hand side. Couldn't think what it was called then. Brain fog, don't you love it? But it's much easier to paint on the right hand side of something for me because I'm right handed. If you're left handed, then obviously the left hand side will be easier. So let's get a bit of that colour in and we can turn it back the correct way. Don't think I want any brown on the koala itself. And again, let's drop in, it's got a bit too much water on it, this brush. Let's drop a bit of stronger colour in to suggest that there is a texture going on. But we don't need to do too much to it. Maybe we need to put a little bit of it down here amongst the green just to go, yeah, that tree does continue further down. But for the most part, I'm good with that. And then just before we put any detailing in at all, I want to start to add some shading to our koala. So for this, I'm going to need the black iron oxide. Now the black iron oxide, when you put it down, is an incredibly strong colour. So you have to be quite frugal with it. So either like this technique where you're using a brush that holds a lot of water, and so therefore you can blend out, or the colour will kind of dissipate as you pick it up. Or you could work wet into wet. Or if you don't like working straight from the pan in the way that I do, you could always, of course, mix up a puddle of colour into a palette and test it on a scrap of paper before you do any more painting. My piece of advice, of course, is to make sure that when you test colours, you test them out on the same type of paper as what you're going to be doing your final piece on. Otherwise, they may read a little bit differently. So can you see now I wanted to put that blue underneath? It's sort of shining through like that a lot. Let's work on some of these shadows under here. So we've got a little bit of one in there and a little bit of one in there. And this is what I would describe as blocking in, which is a bit of an appropriated technique from oils and pastels, but I like to get colour on everything in my paintings, because then I can see the koala for the trees. Then I can see exactly what else needs work. And for me, it's a much more impressionistic and faster way of working. Might not be ideal for you, but it works well for me. That way I can get colour on everything, and then I can say to myself, oh, do you know what, Ali? That needs to be a bit deeper. That needs to be a bit paler. But now that I've got colour on everything, I can see what else my painting needs. Whoops. And what my painting needs is a really good blast with the heat gun. So if you have any questions and you're watching this live about what I've done so far, pop them into the chat. Julie has just put females, because Julie is obviously our koala expert today. Females mostly have a clean white chest. Ooh, that's interesting. Ah, okay. So that might be the way to tell one from the other. Very interesting. Thank you very much, Julie. Right, I'm going to give this a blast with the heat gun. And then we'll come back and we'll work on some of the detail. Bear with me. Okay, while that is drying, we've got a couple of observations come in on the live chat. Thank you very much for taking part in that. Anne is saying it took me a long time not to panic when I put down strong darks. Yeah, Anne, I know exactly what you mean. It's really scary, isn't it? You've got this beautiful white piece of paper and you put down a strong colour, and your instant reflex is to kind of blot it out or lift it away or blend it out even. But of course it's the darks that really make our subject look three-dimensional. So very important to get them on. And mine aren't dark enough yet, but they're getting there. And Julie is saying that she loves the black iron oxide, works really well. Thank you very much, Julie. Yeah, it's granulating beautifully and creating some lovely textures on top of that pen work that we did earlier. Right, I think that is all done. Let's just wait for it to go cold a little bit. Wafting away at it. And then for the next part, I need to drop my drawing board down flat. So you get a slightly different aspect of what I'm going to be working on. And I wanted to create loads of texture on my koala. But doing it in grey is quite a challenge. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to use Brusho, and I thought, oh, this is a really good opportunity, Ali, for you to show people a slightly different product. And this is the product that I'm going to be using today. These are made by Derwent and they're called Graphitint. Now, Graphitint pencils I've used 2 or 3 times for demonstrations and for workshops this year. They are really beautiful, and they're called Graphitint because they're water soluble. They're like a watercolour pencil, but they are all shades of grey. Even when you get things like a pink or a blue, they're kind of based on grey. I've got 5 colours here. I'm not sure that I need all 5. And because you know me, I'm super prepared. In my sketchbook, what I did was do a little sample of each one for you so you could see exactly the sort of thing that I am talking about. They're kind of muted colours. Perfect for our koala, but really interesting if you like to draw and paint nature anyway. And these are the 5 that I've pulled out: warm grey, juniper, cloud grey, midnight black and cool grey. Again, I'm not sure that I need all of them. I'm going to use some of them for getting a little bit of detail in my koala, but I'm also going to do a slightly bonkers technique with them as well. So stay tuned. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out the midnight black, and I'm going to go back in to my koala to add some of the shadows. I'm going to use, you probably saw me change my grip on my pencil then, rather than using it down here. I've got my hand over the top so that I can expose more of the colour strip and I can get some better darks in. Let's get some of those worked in. Now, with a water-soluble pencil, you can choose whether you do kind of all of your shading and then you wet them afterwards, or you can do it a little bit at a time. I personally prefer the doing all the shading and then wetting it technique, just because, again, I think it has a more impressionistic quality. Let's work those back in. We'll start to work some of those kind of fluffy lines into so that we get furry ears in there. I can also use a little bit of it. Oh, let's switch to the juniper, because there it is. So this is another reason to make a colour chart. What the end colours look like and what they actually look like, 2 different things. Much better to make your own colour chart. I'm going to use a little bit of that juniper just in under the eyes to give that kind of pinky appearance. And let's use a little bit of it on the end of the nose too. I don't think there's pink anywhere. Actually, do you know what? I'm going to put a bit of pink in the ears just because I can. And then let's have a quick look at my colour chart again. I think I'm going to go for the cool grey. No, that's the cloud grey. Get your glasses on, Ali. Cool grey. I want to add a touch of texture in here. I'm going to add a little bit more texture in a minute. So if you are a lover of creating texture in your paintings, then stay tuned. I'm going to go back to the midnight black, and I'm going to do some work on the nose, making sure for this that I use a downward stroke to show the direction of the surface of the koala. I don't want to do kind of left to right, otherwise it will look a bit weird. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a damp brush. You don't want your brush to be wet. Where's my bit of kitchen rock on? There it is. I've got a slightly smaller Casaneo mop now. This is a size 0. Just putting it in the water because I'm a terror for putting my brushes away dirty. And I'm going to take the majority of the moisture off, and then I'm going to just sort of dust my way with damp areas back over the top, possibly pausing a little bit longer when I get to the eyes and to the nose, so that I can make sure that I sculpt that in the way that I want it to come together. That's looking better already. And again, a bit of sort of a scumbling technique over the top. Let's add a bit more water to that and scumble our way. So again, I'm very mindful about the touch, about the amount of pressure that I'm creating, so that I don't press too hard and create a texture that I don't really want. Okay, I'm good with that. That's starting to come together. It still needs a bit of work. So here comes the bonkers technique. What I want to do to create some lovely texture on here is I want to use these in more of a powdery form. But first I need to create myself a mask. It's very hard to say mask when you've got a cold. I have to hold my breath when I say mask. Let's use a few bits of kitchen roll laid around so that I don't get too much texture in my background. Some of it will be all right, I just don't want it all over the place. And then what I've got here, yes, absolutely, Julie, you could use charcoal pencils. What I would do if you are using a charcoal pencil is to do all of your watercolour first and then use your charcoal pencil at the end. Now, charcoal pencils you can move with a little bit of water. You can also move them with alcohol. You can move them with some really high proof 80%-ish vodka. That works as well. Maybe that's another Technique Tuesday demonstration that we do. But here I have got a little miniature sieve. Now this is the sort of sieve that I would use to put icing sugar in and dust over one of my latest baking creations to cover up all the burnt bits. But actually they're really good for doing an interesting technique here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to spritz my koala first. Some of the colour is going to run, that's okay. And then over the top I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to literally grate my pencil into the surroundings, so you can see little bits of colour starting to appear. What colour was that? That was the warm grey. Don't think I want to use the juniper, so we'll set that to one side. Let's go for the cloud grey. Oh, that's a good one. I like that one. Going in there. So I get that kind of lovely broken fur pattern texture without me having to do an awful lot. And you know me, love a shortcut. And then a touch more in a slightly different colour. Let's concentrate some of it down here on the hind quarters. And then, I'm just thinking, no, let's take this away. And then let's give our koala another light spritz just to fix this colour a bit more. And then guess what? We need to give it another dry before we put that last detail in. So we are on the home straight now, and it needs some deeper darks and it needs a few highlights here and there. But I need to give it a good blast with the heat gun before I can do any of that stuff. I can see in the chat that some of you are really loving the sieve technique. You used to be able to buy little miniature graters. In fact, Derwent used to make them, but for some reason they have discontinued them. And I've looked at nutmeg graters and all sorts of other things, but actually my kitchen is always a source of tools for me for applying things. And when I saw this, the mesh on it is really, really fine, obviously, because it's designed to pass icing sugar through it. So it was the perfect tool, really. And don't worry, I will wash it before I dust another creation with icing sugar again. Incidentally, if you're not sure where to get one of those, just pop over to the blog. I've put a link to one on Amazon, really, really cheap, not expensive to buy at all. In fact, if I was really sensible, I'd have one dedicated for my pencil techniques, wouldn't I? Okay, so our koala is dry. Now I'm going to switch to a smaller brush. So we're moving on to the imitation sables. I need to prop my board up so that I can see our koala a bit better now. There we go, that's better. I'm switching to a smaller brush, to a size 6 brush now. And I'm going to go back in with the black iron oxide to start to bring some of those darks together. And for this I will be using a blending out technique, and what that means is that I will be working on dry paper, but I will be using some water to pull and push my colour around, and that way I have absolute control over it. And because I've done all the impressionistic thing, I get the payoff now. I get to do the sort of more detailed aspect of it, because all the sort of impressionistic stuff is all done. It's a nice payoff. Right, let's get some dark shadows in under these ears to make our koala start to stand out. One of the plus points of black iron oxide is that it makes for a very good shadow colour, because it is pretty translucent. You can glaze it over the top, like I've glazed it over the top of my Italian Venetian red there. So it doesn't look like a very positive thing, it just looks like more of a shadow colour, which is grand. Now Rabina is saying that she thinks that the sieve technique is better than the graters. Well, that's good news, isn't it? I still have quite a few of the graters, but it's useless. There's no point at all in me going, oh, do you know what you can use? You can use one of these Derwent graters. No, by the way, you can't get hold of them anymore, because that's not fun, is it? Not, and that wouldn't make me a useful art tutor at all. Right, let's start getting a bit of dark shadow. I still have a couple of things in my arsenal to add to this over the top, but I need to get some shadows in, and I don't want to make them quite that linear. Let's spread those out a touch so that we've got slightly deeper shadow on this side. Getting my fingers involved because I always do that. Whoops, stay. And then over this side, let's get a deeper shadow going over on here. So we've got ears starting to stand out. I tell you what I do need to do is let's do a bit, I didn't plan on doing this, but why not? Let's do a bit of double loading. So I'm going to load up my brush with the Italian Venetian red, and I'm just going to pop the end of my brush in the black iron oxide, because I'm going to do some negative painting. I'm going to make this tree slightly deeper here so that koala head stands out a touch more. So rather than trying to make this brighter, I've made the thing behind it deeper, and then that way it stands out a bit more. I'm just going to stand on my head to do this side. Let's get some of that deeper colour in there. And I think that's about as far as I'm going to be able to push this. I've still got a couple of things that I can do to it. Let's put a shadow in here. You can put that in paint. You could do it in your pencil or your pen if you felt more confident doing it that way. Choice is entirely yours. Let's get those smudged out. That's better, standing out a bit more. I need to be brave and to put some darker colour up here on the koala. Don't panic if you're watching this. I've used it in a sort of scumbled technique. There we go, that's better. There, why didn't I do that before? And then I'm going to do that again. So again, you see my hand moves from holding it like a point to scumbling that colour over the top. Scumbled just means kind of dragged over the surface, just gives a different texture again. And I think what we'll need to do is to pop a slightly darker shadow in there so that that hind leg comes forwards. You will take a lot more care over yours than I'm doing. I am rushing mine in a big way, but you can take a lot more care and effort over yours. That's a bit dark, Ali. Let's scumble some colour over here, and then that kind of drops down into there. I think we might need to lift some of that a little bit. Maybe if we spread it out a bit more, that would be better. There we go. So I'm using little circles with my brush now to get that in. That does look better. And then a couple more shadows. We're a bit devoid of shadows down here to push our koala forwards. So let's soften the edge of that one and soften that coming up in there. So again, our koala is kind of sitting in the tree. And because that leg looks a bit too long. Oh, that's not quite dark enough. So let's get a deep shadow in there and blend it out. So that's it's getting better, but I do need to add a couple of highlights. Whoops. And to do that, I'm going to be using a tiny touch of gouache and a tiny brush. So this is a permanent white gouache because it's white. You've got two whites in gouache. You've got permanent white and you've got zinc white. Zinc white is used predominantly for mixing. Permanent white is better just for being a white. Now, don't scrimp on your purchasing of gouache. There's many qualities, varieties and brands out there. Buy the absolute best that you can afford, because in the white you will find that if you buy a cheap gouache, the white really won't cover and it gets very frustrating. So I'm going to use this to add a few little highlights here and there. We've got a few highlights around the muzzle, a few kind of little white dotty bits going back in, and I'm really kind of tweaking it now. A little bit of faff, you could argue, but for the majority, what I want to do is to get these lovely kind of fluffy ear shapes back in again. I could have masked them out. That would be another option. You could use a white gel pen or something instead of using paint. I just like using gouache because then if I get it in the wrong place or something goes wrong with it, I can re-wet it, smudge it and lift it back out again. So that is my reasoning behind creating it in this way. I need to break up some of those dark shadows so that they don't look quite so formal. And it is getting there. Thank you for all your kind comments coming in. It's not as neat and tidy as I would perhaps do if I was just amusing myself, but I'm always very conscious that that needs to be darker. I'll change that in a minute. I'm always very conscious that you guys are watching live, so don't necessarily want to watch me being very self-indulgent and faffing about. So let's pop a slight bit of scumbling back over the top of here to get extra depth into our fur, and the same over here to break up some of that black. And oh, I've got stuff everywhere. So we're very much in the home straight now. The top of this head isn't standing out as much as I would like it. So again, I'm going to go back in negatively. I'm going to add some green in right up close to the top of the head, and I'll soften that line in a minute so that then our koala starts to pop forward a bit, which it does. Let's soften those edges so that this is our found edge here, but we want kind of everything else to be lost, don't we? And maybe a quick blast with the heat gun. Dee is saying your koala looks so snuggly. Okay, I have a couple of things just to do to it, but I need to dry it off first. Bear with me. And the thing that I'm going to use to finish it off is I'm going to go back in with my waterproof pen to add some extra kind of fluffiness, a bit of kind of detail back in, which is going to help break up the edges and the ends of things that I have painted. And I know that traditionally, if you're doing a pen and wash, you do the pen and then you do all of the kind of the washy bits in with it with colour afterwards. But you know me, I like a contemporary twist on things, so I tend to do pen wash pen, with my stuff. So I have a bit of pen, and then I wash my colour in, and then I add some extra detail towards the end. And that for me seems to work pretty well. I'm going to use that lovely kind of scribbly technique to break up the edges of our line. I'm going to extend those sleepy eyes with a bit of extra depth. Let's break up some of the fur around the nose, and we can add some shadowing back in underneath the muzzle. So starting to kind of come together just with those last few strokes that you can make. Now you could go back in with a pencil. There's a really good argument. If you're nervous about using a pen, then make sure that your surface is completely dry, and go back in with a pencil, because then if for some reason it doesn't work out, or you've put the mark in the wrong place, you can always rub it out. And that is a really useful tool to be able to go back and edit. Again, pencil, really kind of forgotten. You draw out with it, don't you? And then you sort of abandon it in favour of paint. But actually, there's every reason to go back in with your pencil towards the end to add extra detail. And I think I am going to call that done. Now I will put a copy of it onto the blog, onto the website. So just to remind you where those things are. You go over to my website. Let's go over to the homepage. So the homepage will look something like this. You'll see the title, and you'll see a little kind of changing video. The website had an upgrade yesterday, so you'll see lots of different things on there and some latest news, and you'll probably spy there's some unusual links at the top. You're going to have to keep your eyes peeled on my social media to find out what those are about. But for today, you need the bit that says blog, and then click or tap on the bit that says Technique Tuesday for July. And there you will find the photograph and all the resources, all the things that I used. You'll find the broadcast, and you will see there it says Ali's painting so far, and I will pop it underneath that so that you can find it. Just to remind you that website is www.learningtopaint.co.uk. And you can also find me on social media as well, at Ali Board Artist. It's really important for me to get seen by a greater audience, that you like things, that you share things, that you tag me in it. If you put at Ali Board Artist, if you have a go at the koala, tag me in it, because I'd love to see what you've created. Put your own spin on it. Do it in different colours. Do it large, do it small. Use your own creative skills to put that bit of a spin on it. Thank you very much for joining me. I am off now. I've got a few classes to teach this week, and then you will find me in the middle of a field just north of Nottinghamshire for patchings next week, the 13th, 14th and 15th. I cannot wait to see some of you in person. But if for some reason geography can't let you be there, then don't forget that we have a Technique Tuesday coming up in August. I'm just reaching for my notes to remind me of what it is. Yes, our August theme of the month is inspired by Dorset, my beloved home county. And Technique Tuesday is back on the 1st of August, where we will be doing harvest time, because actually right at the moment they are getting the harvest in, and so we're going to look at more of a landscape style of project for that. Thank you very much. Thank you for talking to each other in the chat and for supporting each other. Thank you for your support of me. Take lots and lots of care, won't you? And if I see you, no matter whether it is online or in person, take lots and lots of care, won't you? Bye, lovely people. Bye.